Imagine living a quiet life, a normal life, when suddenly everything you thought you knew is shattered in an instant. That was the reality for 46-year-old Analyn Osias, a woman who had everything to live for, until the night of October 29th, 2023, when she was brutally murdered in her own home. The attack wasn't random, nor was it a simple crime of passion. The man responsible, a 45-year-old James Pualic, claimed that a demonic voice told him to do it, and in front of her children and nothing else. What happens when the line between reality and mental illness blurs so completely that a man in a grip of his own mind believes he's being communicated by forces beyond his control? In this chilling case, a deadly combination of domestic abuse, obsession, and mental health issues led to a horrifying outcome. Today, we're going to dive into the tragic and disturbing story of how one man murdered a woman in cold blood, all because he claimed a demonic force told him to do it. The beginning of the story wasn't unlike many others. Analyn Osias, a 46-year-old woman from Bendigo, Australia, had a life that seemed, at least from the outside, pretty normal. She had kids, friends, and a job. She was even described as being an active member of her community. But behind closed doors, she was trapped in a relationship with a man who had a dark side. Her partner, James Pualic, was a 45-year-old man who on the surface seemed like just another person trying to make it in life. But the relationship wasn't what it appeared to be. For months, Pualic had shown signs of abusive behavior, manipulating, controlling, and ultimately emotionally tormenting Analyn. After 8 months together, she had finally had enough and decided to break things off. But James didn't accept it. Like many abusive individuals, he wasn't willing to let go. Instead, he became obsessive. His mental health issues, including a diagnosed schizotype disorder, worsened. And as his mind deteriorated, so did his actions. For days leading up to the murder, James was reported to be unstable. He began making threats. He started talking about hearing voices that told him to do things. Voices that were leading him to believe that something terrible was about to happen. Little did anyone know that those voices were about to lead him down an unimaginable path. On October 29, 2023, James Pualic decided to confront Analyn one final time. The night was supposed to be like any other, but instead it became a nightmare. James forcibly entered Analyn's home while she was with her children. What followed was a brutal, unprovoked attack. James didn't just kill Analyn in a fit of rage. He planned it. He showed up knowing what he was about to do. He was driven by something far beyond simple jealousy or anger. He was driven by something darker, a voice in his head that he claimed told him to do it. He described it as a demonic voice that instructed him to harm her. James said the voices labeled Analyn as witch and told him she needed to be eliminated. With a knife, he attacked Analyn, stabbing her multiple times in what can only be described as a violent frenzy. Her children, who witnessed the entire thing, were hopeless in the face of their mother's brutal death. They saw everything: the blood, the screams, the terror. James didn't care. His mind was no longer his own, consumed by whatever dark force he thought was pulling the strings. But here's where the story takes a truly disturbing turn. James didn't flee after the murder. He stayed. He didn't try to hide what he'd done or run from the consequences. Instead, he calmly awaited the authorities' arrival. When they found him, he was still in the house waiting for them. And when questioned, he didn't deny the crime. Instead, he told them exactly why he did it. And he said the voices told him to do it. So, what would drive a man to take another person's life in such a gruesome manner? Could it really have been a demonic voice, or was it something else to play here? To understand this, we need to look deeper into James' mental state. James Pualic was diagnosed with schizotype disorder. This condition is closely related to schizophrenia, a mental illness that can cause hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking. People who suffer from schizophrenia often experience hearing voices that aren't real, voices that can be compelling and terrifying, but not real. These voices might command them to attack in ways they wouldn't otherwise, and in James' case, they told him to kill. But James didn't just wake up one day and heard voices. His mental health had been deteriorating for a long time, and over the course of his relationship with Analyn, his behavior became more and more erratic. There were warning signs that Analyn had tried to ignore or deal with, likely because she loved him and hoped he would get better. But as his obsession grew, and his grip on reality slipped, it became clear that there was no turning back. He was convinced that he had to kill Analyn, and the voices that drove him to the point weren't merely random thoughts. They were powerful, overwhelming, and terrifying. In his mind, they were real, and they controlled everything he did that night. After the murder, James was arrested and taken into custody. His actions shocked the community of Bendigo. How could someone commit such a horrendous crime? And how could a man who appeared to be so calm in his aftermath have been driven to do such violence? The legal proceedings that followed were filled with tension. James's defense argued that his mental illness played a major role in his actions. The idea that he was under the control of a demonic voice didn't seem so far-fetched when compared to his medical diagnosis. His lawyers painted a picture of a man who was no longer in control of his actions, a man who was suffering from severe mental health issues that made him believe he was carrying out a necessary act. But the prosecution countered by pointing to the deliberate nature of James' actions. They argued that despite his mental health issues, he still made a conscious decision to enter Analyn's home, to kill her, and to wait for the authorities. They believed that his actions were premeditated, and that his mental illness was not an excuse for murder. In the end, James Pualic was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. He was not executed for his mental health issues, but was instead held accountable for the horrific crimes he committed. The impact of Analyn's murder ripped through the Bendigo community. Her friends, family, and neighbors were devastated by the loss. She was remembered as a long-living mother, a kind friend, and a strong woman who had tried to escape an abusive relationship. Her death left a void that could never be filled. The murder also sparked discussions about the intersection of mental illness and violent crime. Can a person truly be held accountable for their actions if they are under the influence of psychosis? And what role do mental health conditions play in violent acts like this one? These are tough questions that the justice system must grapple with every day, and this case was no exception. James Pualic's story is one of tragedy. A story about a man whose mental health deteriorated so much that he believed a demonic force was controlling his actions. His delusions led to the brutal murder of a woman who simply wanted to move on with her life. And while we may never fully understand the depth of his pain, the loss of Analyn and the impact it had on their children is undeniable. If you've been affected by the story or if you have thoughts on the case, we encourage you to share them in the comments. Do you believe that mental illness should be taken into account when it comes to crimes like these? And how do we as a society ensure that people like James Pualic get the help they need before it's too late? Let us know your thoughts, and if you found this video important, please give it a like, subscribe for more stories that explore the darkest corners of human nature.